Ontario holds roughly 1/5 of the world's surface fresh water. 4 of the 5 Great Lakes border or lie within the province, and their combined volume is approximately 22,810 cubic kilometers of fresh water. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency describes the Great Lakes as containing about 84% of North America's surface fresh water and around 21% of the global supply. The province most people picture as a place of towns and suburbs sits on top of one of the largest freshwater reserves in human history. Fact 4. Beyond the Great Lakes, Ontario has approximately 250,000 additional lakes scattered across the Canadian Shield. From the air, the northern part of the province does not look like land dotted with water. It looks like water interrupted by rock. The lakes range from vast to pocket-sized, and many do not have names. The province that contains Niagara Falls and the path tunnels and Highway 401 also has an Arctic coast with tidal saltwater lapping at it. Most Ontario residents would not be able to find it on a map. The geography just established is part of something this video keeps returning to. Ontario is not the place most people have been picturing. Point Pelee, the southernmost point of mainland Canada, extends further south than Northern California. Ontario's southern tip and Rome, Italy, sit at roughly the same latitude. The province that most Canadians picture as the frozen north reaches deep into latitudes that support vineyards, long growing seasons, and agricultural crops that most people associate with warmer American states. The world's southernmost polar bears also live in Ontario, in Polar Bear Provincial Park on the Hudson Bay coast. The province that bottoms out below Northern California also contains wild polar bears in its north. The distance between those two realities within the same provincial boundary is roughly equal to the distance from New York City to Atlanta. Ontario also spans 2 time zones. The western and eastern edges operate on clocks an hour apart, which means crossing certain lines in northwestern Ontario changes your phone's displayed time. Fact 10. Almost 25% of Canada's entire population lives within 160 kilometers of Toronto. One city's gravitational pull has shaped where an entire country's people settled. In most of Ontario, outside that radius, the population density drops to levels that would be unremarkable in Siberia. Fact 11. Toronto has more than 140 languages spoken within its city limits. 44% of residents have a first language that is not English or French. A walk through a single Toronto neighborhood can pass through Korean, Somali, Tamil, Portuguese, and Cantonese in the space of a few blocks, placing it among the most linguistically diverse cities anywhere on Earth. The name Toronto almost certainly comes from Tkaronto, a Mohawk word meaning something close to where there are trees standing in the water. The reference was to wooden stakes used to direct fish into weirs. The largest city in Canada is named after a fish trap. Burwash, Ontario, operated as a correctional farm and prison camp from the early 20th century until the 1970s. During its operational years, the Ontario government erected highway signs on the surrounding roads warning motorists not to pick up hitchhikers. The signs publicly acknowledged that prisoners escaped frequently enough to require a standing advisory for passing drivers. The facility closed in the 1970s, and the signs came down. But the warnings they represented outlasted the institution that prompted them. Fact 27. Algonquin Provincial Park, the destination for millions of Ontario camping trips and canoe portages every summer, has the highest density of black bears in North America. The park's combination of forest cover, food sources, and protected status produces bear populations that exceed comparable areas in the American wilderness. In Ontario, saying sorry is not legally an admission of guilt. The Apology Act of 2009 exists specifically because Ontarians apologize so reflexively that courts were beginning to treat apologies as confessions. The province legislated the social habit into the legal record. Insulin was isolated at the University of Toronto in 1921. Frederick Banting and Charles Best conducted the experiments that turned a death sentence into a manageable condition. Before their work, a type 1 diabetes diagnosis meant the patient would die within months. The discovery changed the outcome for hundreds of millions of people. Insulin derived from that Toronto research is still keeping people alive today. Fact 18. The first Tim Hortons opened in Hamilton in 1964. The chain that became the shorthand for Canadian identity, that Canadians cite when trying to explain something quintessentially national to someone who has not been here, started in Hamilton. The Double Double and the Timbits came from a single location opened 6 decades ago. Fact 19. The CN Tower in Toronto was the world's tallest freestanding structure for 32 years, from 1976 until the Burj Khalifa surpassed it in 2010. It stands at 553 meters and contains a glass floor at 342 meters, from which you can look straight down through the air to the street below. The tower was built to solve a specific problem. Toronto's growing skyline was blocking television and radio signals, and the city needed a transmitter tall enough to clear its own towers. Wayne Gretzky was born in Brantford, Justin Bieber came from Stratford, and Drake grew up in Toronto's Forest Hill neighborhood. Jim Carrey grew up in Newmarket, and John Candy was also from Newmarket, which means one small Ontario town produced 2 of North America's most recognized comedians. Alex Trebek was born in Sudbury, the same city built inside a meteor crater, and Chris Hadfield, the first Canadian to walk in space and who later served as commander of the International Space Station, grew up in Sarnia. Ontario has produced an improbable share of people whose names are recognized on multiple continents. The celebrities, athletes, and astronauts that other places claim as cultural exports tend, in surprising numbers, to trace back to a specific Ontario address. The Bruce Nuclear Generating Station on the eastern shore of Lake Huron is the largest nuclear power plant in the world by operational output capacity. It runs 8 CANDU reactors and generates enough electricity to supply a significant share of Ontario's provincial grid. Its security force, the Nuclear Security Force at Bruce Power, has won the U.S. National SWAT Championship 4 times, beating American SWAT teams at a U.S. competition. The most decorated tactical security unit in that competition's history does not operate out of a major American city. It operates out of Bruce County, Ontario. Along the Trans-Canada Highway in northern Ontario, pulled off into a gravel patch, there is a record store operating out of a converted meat trailer called Usyk. Usyk is an Inupiat word for walrus baculum, the anatomical term for the walrus penis bone, and the store has been named after that bone for years. It sits on one of Canada's main national highways, selling vinyl records, and the name is something most passers-by have to ask about. Fact 33. The Beatles played Maple Leaf Gardens in Toronto during their North American tours in the mid-1960s, and the shows produced crowd noise so sustained and loud that crew members reported the musicians could not hear themselves play. Toronto was not their first North American stop, but the Maple Leaf Gardens concerts are among the most documented accounts of audience intensity in their entire North American touring history.